Tacoma waterfront dawn, steel containers and cranes, legitimate shipping empire masking crime syndicate. Rourke Hanley's minimalist office overlooks it all. Today, acquisition. Woman delivered through intermediaries, vetted as compliant, attractive, temporary. Someone ornamental for functions, controllable, forgettable. Aveline Cross stood near window, warm brown skin catching pale light, modest posture despite silk dress chosen by others. Natural hair pulled back simply, hands at sides without fidgeting. She didn't perform, didn't posture, just stood there, calm, observant, waiting. Everything should have been simple. Rourke's world operated on transactions. People revealed themselves quickly, what they wanted, what they'd trade, how they'd break. But as his gaze swept over her, something in her stillness felt wrong. Not defiant, not afraid, just honest. And in Rourke's world, honesty was the one thing he couldn't calculate. Before we continue, like this video. If you've ever felt invisible in a world that only sees credentials and titles, share it with someone who needs to hear that courage doesn't require permission. And subscribe, so you don't miss what happens when one temp worker sees the truth everyone else is paid to ignore. Now let's continue. Chapter 1. The woman arrived at 6:47 a.m., delivered in a black sedan with tinted windows that had cleared 3 security checkpoints before reaching the compound's main entrance. Bexley Rowan watched from the second-floor observation deck as she emerged. Early 20s, warm brown skin with golden undertones, natural hair pulled back in a simple style that suggested someone else had chosen it for her. She wore a silk dress, expensive but not flashy, cut to suggest without revealing. Everything about her presentation looked carefully constructed by intermediaries who understood Rourke Hanley's requirements. Bexley had vetted a dozen companions over the years. They usually arrived with practiced confidence, the kind that came from knowing exactly what they were being paid to provide. They smiled at security guards, made eye contact that lingered just long enough, performed availability without being explicit about it. This one didn't perform anything. She simply stood beside the sedan, hands at her sides without fidgeting, waiting for instruction like someone who'd been told to wait and saw no reason to do anything else. Bexley descended to the main entrance. Standard security clearance. Identification verified. Belongings scanned. Preliminary questions about contacts and communications. Most companions treated this as theater, answering with rehearsed patience, while mentally calculating how soon they could access the dawn directly. Aveline Cross answered each question with the same straightforward simplicity. Any family we should be aware of? Bexley asked, reviewing her fabricated background, the one the intermediaries had provided, clean enough to pass surface scrutiny. No family. Previous employers who might contact you? No one will be looking for me. Not, I don't think so, or, probably not. Just certainty stated plainly. You understand the arrangement? Bexley's voice was neutral, professional. You're here as a companion. Mr. Hanley values discretion. You'll attend functions when required, maintain appropriate behavior, ask no questions about business operations. I understand. And you're comfortable with those terms? She paused, the first hesitation Bexley had seen. I needed security. I was told Mr. Hanley provided it. That seemed fair. No flirtation, no suggestion. Just transaction, stated as fact. Bexley escorted her through the compound, past the legitimate shipping offices, where morning staff were arriving, through the secured residential wing, where the actual hierarchy operated. Her quarters were prepared. Modest suite with river view, private bath, wardrobe already stocked by staff who knew Rourke's aesthetic preferences. Someone will bring your meals, Bexley explained. Mr. Hanley will send for you when ready. Until then, you're to remain in your quarters. Do you have questions? Thank you. She didn't ask when she'd meet the dawn. Didn't ask what companion actually meant beyond the surface explanation. Didn't ask about compound protocols, payment schedules, or how long the arrangement might last. Most companions asked everything. Bexley reported to Rourke's office on the 3rd floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Tacoma waterfront and the shipping empire that masked what really happened inside these walls. She's here, Bexley said. Clearance complete. No flags. Rourke didn't look up from logistics reports. And she's quiet, compliant, answers directly without embellishment. Bexley paused. Almost too directly. Most companions perform more. Performance suggests calculation. Rourke signed off on a manifest that would move containers through 3 countries before anyone looked at the contents. Calculation suggests intelligence. Is she intelligent? I don't know yet. She doesn't give enough to assess. Bexley moved to the window, watching shipping cranes move in choreographed silence below. She said something unusual when I explained the arrangement. Which was? I asked if she was comfortable with the terms. She said I needed security. I was told Mr. Hanley provided it. That seemed fair. Bexley turned. Not yes, or of course. Just, transaction stated as fact. Like she was accepting a business contract. Rourke's pen stopped moving. She sees this as business, or she doesn't understand what she's actually agreed to. That got Rourke's attention. He looked up, pale eyes sharp. The intermediaries vetted her. They know our requirements. They said appropriate and compliant. They didn't say experienced. Bexley's tone was careful. She might not know what companions typically provide in these arrangements. Then she'll learn. Rourke returned to his reports. Arranged dinner. Tonight. My quarters. Standard protocol. Bexley understood standard protocol. Private meal. Opportunity for the Don to assess compatibility. Subtle pressure to establish the power dynamic that would govern everything that followed. Simple theater that had worked with every companion before. At 7 p.m., Bexley escorted Aveline to Rourke's private dining room. She wore a different dress. Someone from staff had delivered options, and she'd chosen the most modest. Her hair was still pulled back simply. No jewelry. Minimal makeup. She looked like she was attending a job interview, not a seduction. Rourke was already seated when they entered. He gestured to the chair across from him without standing, a test most companions recognized immediately. They'd sit with calculated grace, make themselves seen, establish their presence, through deliberate movement. Aveline simply sat, hands folded in her lap, posture straight, but not rigid. Waiting. Thank you, Bexley, Rourke said. Dismissal. When they were alone, Rourke poured wine, didn't offer her a glass yet. Watched to see if she'd ask, or if she'd understand. The omission was intentional. She didn't react, just sat there, calm and observant. You understand why you're here, Rourke said, not a question. I'm here as a companion. I was told you value discretion and expect obedience. I can offer both. The honesty was so complete it felt like strategy, but her eyes held no calculation, no angles, no performance of innocence that suggested she was actually performing sophistication. And what do you expect in return? Rourke asked, still holding the wine bottle, still watching. Security, that's what was arranged. Security from what? She paused. The first real hesitation. From uncertainty. From having nowhere safe to go. From needing to make decisions I'm not equipped to make. There. Something true beneath the surface. Not manipulation. Genuine admission. Rourke poured her wine. Set the glass in front of her. Most people in your position would say they expect money. Or luxury. Or access to power. I expect those things are included in security, she said quietly. But they're not what I needed. I needed to know I'd be safe. They said you provided that. So I came. She picked up the wine glass. Took a small sip. Set it down precisely where it had been. Rourke leaned back, studying her in the warm light of the dining room that overlooked dark water and distant container ships. Everything about this moment should have been simple. People revealed themselves quickly in his world. What they wanted, what they'd trade, how they'd break. But as he watched Aveline sit across from him, answering his questions with plain honesty that held no trace of seduction or fear or strategic positioning, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Uncertainty. She wasn't playing a game he recognized. And in Rourke's world, people who didn't play recognizable games were either very dangerous or very naive. He had 6 months to determine which she was, and whether either answer meant she'd survive that long. Welcome to the compound, Aveline, he said. Thank you, Mr. Hanley. Not Rourke, not sir. Just the formal address someone had probably told her to use. She didn't know the rules, didn't know the games, didn't know what companion actually meant in the hierarchy she'd just entered. And somehow, that made her the most unpredictable acquisition Rourke Hanley had ever made. Chapter 2. Over the following week, Rourke observed Aveline with the same methodical attention he applied to logistics operations and territorial negotiations. Most companions revealed their strategies within days. The careful touches, the manufactured vulnerability, the way they positioned themselves in doorways or adjusted clothing when he entered a room. Performance had patterns. Calculation had tells. Aveline had neither. She appeared for breakfast in the private dining room each morning at 7, wearing modest dresses from the wardrobe that had been provided. She sat where Bexley directed her, ate quietly, answered when spoken to. And when Rourke studied her, which he did, obviously, testing to see if she'd notice and adjust her behavior accordingly, she simply returned his gaze with calm observation that held no seduction, no fear, and no apparent awareness that being watched should prompt any reaction at all. On the third morning she asked a question. The shipping schedule's on your desk, she said, voice quiet but clear. Do they follow the same routes every week, or do they change? Bexley, stationed near the door, went very still. Companions didn't ask about business. Ever. It was the fundamental rule. They existed in proximity to power, not participation in it. Rourke set down his coffee. Why do you ask? I noticed the same port names appearing in different orders. I wondered if that was intentional, or if the papers were just stacked randomly. She paused. I'm sorry. Should I not have looked? There, that genuine uncertainty. She wasn't testing boundaries. She was asking if boundaries existed that she'd accidentally crossed. Most people in your position wouldn't look at all, Rourke said, watching her face for calculation that never appeared. And if they did, they wouldn't mention it. Oh, she processed this. Should I pretend I didn't notice things? The question was so honest, it bordered on absurd. In Rourke's world, everyone pretended. Everyone performed. The idea that someone would ask whether dishonesty was required, rather than simply employing it, was unusual. No, Rourke said finally. If you notice things, you may mention them, but understand that some observations are more dangerous to voice than others. How will I know which ones? You won't. Until you learn. She nodded, accepting this the way she seemed to accept everything, as simple fact requiring no emotional response. Then I'll try to learn quickly. After she left, Bexley approached the table. She doesn't understand the rules, no. Rourke returned to his scheduling reports, but his attention was divided in ways it rarely was. She doesn't. That makes her unpredictable. Yes. And you haven't. Bexley paused, choosing words carefully. You haven't established the arrangement. It's been a week, usually by now. I'm aware of the timeline. Rourke's voice carried the quiet authority that ended conversations. But Bexley had been with him long enough to recognize when the Don was avoiding something, rather than controlling it. The staff are confused, Bexley said. They don't know how to address her. They don't know what her status is. She's not a guest. Not quite staff. And you haven't indicated she's filling the role companions typically fill. Then tell them to treat her with appropriate respect, until I provide further instruction. Appropriate respect for what, exactly? Rourke looked up. For someone under my protection, who hasn't yet defined what that protection entails. That afternoon, Rourke found Aveline in the compound library, a space most companions never used because reading suggested they had internal lives beyond their ornamental function. She was sitting in a leather chair near the window, book open in her lap, completely absorbed. He stood in the doorway watching her for a full minute before she noticed his presence. When she did, she didn't startle or perform surprise. Just looked up, marked her page, and waited. What are you reading? He asked. She showed him the cover, a novel about shipping routes and smuggling operations in the 1920s. I found it on the shelf. I hope that's all right. Bexley said I could use this room. You're interested in smuggling? I'm interested in how things move without being seen. She said it simply, without apparent awareness that the statement could be strategic. The book makes it seem like a kind of choreography. Everything timed precisely so inspections happen in the wrong places at the wrong times. Rourke moved into the room, kept his distance but reduced it enough to make the space feel smaller. Standard technique. Observe how proximity affected her. Most companions would lean into the reduction of distance, invite further closing. Aveline just sat there, book in lap, waiting for him to explain why he'd interrupted her reading. That's exactly what it is, Rourke said. Choreography. Knowing which officials inspect which shipments on which days. Knowing where to place high-risk cargo so it looks routine. Do you do that? She asked it like she was asking if he preferred coffee or tea. Genuine curiosity without judgment. I run a legitimate shipping operation. The answer was automatic. Rehearsed. Of course. She didn't sound convinced or skeptical. Just accepting. But the choreography would work the same way either way, wouldn't it? Legal or not. It's just about knowing the patterns. This was where companions usually flirted, made some comment about patterns and bodies, suggested they understood rhythms beyond logistics, turned conversation towards seduction, through metaphor. Aveline turned a page in her book. Thank you for explaining. I'll keep reading. Dismissal. Not intentional. She genuinely thought the conversation had concluded and was returning to her book. Rourke didn't move. You don't ask about the arrangement. She looked up again. Should I? Most people in your position would want clarity, would want to know expectations. Terms. Duration. I was told the terms. Stay close to you. Be available when called. Ask no questions about business. She paused. Except you just said I could mention things I notice. So I'm not entirely sure about that last part now. But the rest seems clear. And you're comfortable not knowing anything beyond that. The pause was longer this time. She closed the book entirely, giving him her full attention. I'm not comfortable, but I don't know enough to ask better questions yet. So I'm waiting until I understand more. And if understanding takes months? Then it takes months. She said it like someone who'd spent a lifetime waiting for things she couldn't control. I needed security. You're providing it. Everything else is, I'll learn as I go. There was no manipulation in it, no angle. She genuinely believed that waiting indefinitely for clarity was reasonable, because the alternative, wherever she'd come from, had been worse. Rourke studied her in the afternoon light streaming through library windows, her warm brown skin against dark leather, her hands resting calmly on a book about smuggling. She was reading like academic research rather than entertainment. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "I'm sorry, don't be. Expectations are my responsibility, not yours." He turned to leave, paused at the door. "Bexley will arrange for you to join me at dinner tonight. In the main dining room. There will be others present. Business associates. You'll sit beside me. You'll speak only when addressed. You'll reveal nothing about compound operations, or my personal affairs. I understand. Do you?" She met his eyes with that same calm observation. "You're going to see how I perform in front of people who matter to you. You're testing whether I embarrass you, or enhance your image. And you're doing it publicly, so that if I fail, everyone knows I was temporary." The accuracy was startling. Not because she'd deduced his strategy, because she'd stated it plainly, without judgment, like she was describing weather. "And you're comfortable with that test?" Rourke asked. "No. But I understand why it's necessary." She opened her book again. "I'll do my best not to embarrass you." After he left, Bexley fell into step beside him in the corridor. "You're hesitating with her," Bexley observed. "You never hesitate." "I'm assessing." "For a week? You assessed the last 3 companions within 24 hours. The last 3 companions were performing roles I recognized. She isn't performing anything. So what is she doing?" Rourke didn't answer immediately. They walked in silence past secured offices where legitimate business happened, and past doors that led to rooms where other business occurred. The kind that required soundproofing and loyalty enforced through methods the legitimate world didn't acknowledge. "She's waiting," Rourke said finally, "for instruction, for understanding, for something to be explained that she believes will eventually make sense of why she's here." "And you're going to explain it?" "Eventually. When I determine what explanation she can handle." He stopped at the elevator that led to his private quarters. "Until then we watch. We test. And we see how long honest transparency survives in a world built on strategic deception." The elevator doors closed, and Bexley stood in the hallway understanding that his Don, the man who calculated everything, controlled everyone and possessed whatever he wanted, had encountered something he didn't know how to categorize. A woman who wasn't playing games because she didn't know the games existed. And in Rourke Hanley's carefully constructed empire, that made her either the most dangerous person in the compound, or the most vulnerable. Bexley suspected it was both. Chapter 3. 3 weeks felt like a test Aveline didn't know how to study for. She had learned the compound's rhythms. Shift changes at dawn and dusk, the way voices dropped when Rourke entered a room, the hierarchy that governed who spoke when. She had learned that Bexley's silence meant attention, that kitchen staff answered questions but volunteered nothing, that her quarters were cleaned by people who would not meet her eyes. What she had not learned was what she was supposed to be doing. There had been dinners. Sometimes Rourke asked her to sit while he reviewed manifests. Sometimes he simply told her where to be. She attended. She listened. But no one had explained what the arrangement actually required beyond presence. And asking felt dangerous. So when Bexley appeared at her door near midnight and said only, "He wants to see you in the study," Aveline felt something tighten in her chest that wasn't quite fear. The study was smaller than Rourke's office. No view. Just dark paneled walls and a desk beneath a lamp that cast more shadow than light. Rourke stood at the window with his back to the door. 2 glasses of whiskey sat on the desk. He didn't turn, close the door. She did. The latch catching sounded louder than it should have. 3 weeks, he said. His voice was quiet, the way deep water was quiet. People talk. They wonder why you're still here. Aveline stayed near the door. Her hands wanted to fidget. She kept them still. They wonder if you're providing what was arranged. The silence stretched. She knew enough to recognize when he was waiting for her to fill it. But she didn't know what he wanted. And guessing felt more dangerous than silence. He turned. His gaze moved over her with the same assessment she'd seen him apply to shipping schedules. Not cruel. Thorough. "Are you?" The question should have been clear. It wasn't. And lying about understanding seemed worse than admitting ignorance. "I don't know what was arranged," she said. "No one explained that part to me." Something shifted in his expression. Recalculation. "You were brought here as a companion," he said, the word landing with weight. "You understand what that means." "I understand it means staying close to you. Being available when you call. Not asking questions." She paused. "If it means something else, no one told me directly." Rourke moved closer. Not threatening. He didn't need to threaten. He stopped a few feet away. "And if I told you directly now?" Her hands tightened against her sides. The first tell she hadn't controlled. His gaze caught it, then returned to her face. "Then I'd know," she said. "And I'd have to decide if I could do it." "Could you?" The pause was longer this time. She tried to hold his gaze and couldn't. Looked at the desk, the untouched glasses. Anything else? I don't know, she said quietly. I've never. She stopped. The words had been a mistake. She felt it immediately. Felt the way the air changed. The way his stillness became absolute. Never what? Not a question. A command. Her throat felt tight. I've never been with anyone. The silence that followed was different from any she had experienced in the compound. Not waiting, not calculation. The silence of something fundamental shifting, of assumptions being stripped away and replaced with information that changed everything. Rourke didn't move, just stood there with an expression she couldn't read. When he finally spoke, his voice was even quieter. The intermediaries said you were vetted. I was. She forced herself to meet his eyes. I don't know what they told you. I was told you needed someone discreet. Someone who wouldn't cause problems. I needed security. It seemed fair. Fair, he repeated. Yes. He turned away, walked to the window, stood with hands clasped behind his back, looking at dark water and distant ship lights. You can go. Aveline hesitated. It felt like the conversation should require more. But his posture was closed. She had learned when she was being told to leave. She went. Bexley was in the corridor, positioned near the corner. Their eyes met briefly. Something flickered in the security chief's expression, before returning to neutral. Aveline walked back to her quarters, without speaking. Behind her, in the study, Rourke stood at the window and recalculated everything. Chapter 4. Rourke's voice dropped lower, each word deliberate as steel sliding into place. And if I told you directly now what it means? Aveline's hands tightened in her lap, the first physical tell she'd shown all night. But her voice stayed steady. Then I'd know, and I'd have to decide if I could do it. Could you? The pause stretched. Outside, a container ship's horn echoed across the water. Rourke watched her with the same clinical precision he applied to contracts and territorial negotiations. People broke here. They revealed their angles, their leverage, their lies. Aveline looked away for the first time, her gaze fixed on the dark water beyond the windows. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know. I've never. She stopped. Rourke went completely still. Never what? Not a question. A command. Her throat moved as she swallowed. I've never been with anyone. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Outside the study door, Bexley somehow sensed the shift. Whatever was happening inside that room wasn't following protocol. Rourke's mind moved through calculations at brutal speed. The intermediaries had said, vetted. They'd said appropriate for your requirements. They'd presented her as compliant, experienced, temporary. They had never said virgin. That word had never appeared in any conversation, any dossier, any assessment. He'd assumed that was his error. She wasn't performing innocence for strategic advantage. Her stillness wasn't calculation. It was genuine lack of knowledge about rules she'd never learned. The modest posture, the plain answers, the inability to flirt or bargain with her body, none of it had been strategy. It was simply who she was. Everything Rourke had assumed about her collapsed and rebuilt itself in seconds. Why didn't you say so before? His voice was quieter now, stripped of pressure. I didn't know it mattered. She still wouldn't look at him. The people who arranged this asked about health, discretion, whether I could attend functions and follow instructions. No one asked about. Her hands twisted together. That. Rourke moved to the window, putting physical distance between them while his thoughts reorganized. The waterfront stretched dark and industrial below, all sharp edges and hidden depths. Like his world, like the situation he'd just miscalculated entirely. You understood you were being brought here as a companion. You understood what that implied. I understood it meant staying close to you, being available when called, not asking questions. Her voice steadied slightly. If it meant something else specific, no one told me directly. I thought I'd learn as I went. The simplicity was staggering. She'd walked into his world, built on layers of deception and performance, and applied straightforward trust. She'd had no idea she was supposed to be performing something else entirely. Rourke turned from the window. Aveline sat exactly as she had since entering, hands in lap, posture modest but not rigid, eyes finally meeting his again with that same observant calm. Not defiant, not afraid, just present. This changes things, he said. I understand. Her voice was quiet. If you want me to leave, no. The word came out harder than intended. That's not what I meant. Keeping her close suddenly felt less like maintaining an asset, and more like protecting something that didn't belong in his world at all. Something honest in a place built on lies. You'll stay, Rourke said. Not a request. A decision. But the arrangement changes. Aveline nodded slowly. Into what? That was the question. Rourke looked at her. This woman delivered as temporary entertainment, who'd revealed herself as something far more complex, and realized he didn't have an answer yet. Only the certainty that everything he'd assumed had just been fundamentally rewritten. I don't know yet, he admitted, rare honesty, matching hers. But you're not what I thought you were. I'm sorry, don't be. He moved toward the door. Just understand that from now on, things operate differently. He opened the door. Bexley stood precisely where he should be, expression neutral, but eyes sharp. Rourke gave a fractional nod. Everything had changed, and nothing would be explained yet. As Aveline left, Rourke remained by the door, watching her go. 3 weeks ago, he'd accepted what he'd thought was a simple acquisition. Tonight, he'd discovered an accidental truth that would reshape everything. She'd never been with anyone. Those 5 words had recalibrated his entire approach, not just to her, but to what protection meant in a world where innocence was supposed to be performance. Rourke closed the door. Tomorrow, he'd begin restructuring protocols. Tonight, he'd process the uncomfortable reality that he'd brought someone completely unprepared into his world. The whiskey he'd poured earlier sat untouched on his desk. He picked up both glasses and poured them down the bar sink. Some things, he was beginning to understand, required different handling than he'd planned. Chapter 5. 2 months changed everything without announcing itself. Aveline no longer waited in her quarters for summons. She sat 3 chairs down from Rourke during expansion meetings, a portfolio open before her containing shipping routes she'd been asked to memorize. The first time she'd appeared, conversation had stopped. But Rourke had simply continued his analysis, as though her presence required no explanation. She became part of the landscape, quiet, observant, asking questions that revealed she was actually processing what she heard. She didn't contribute strategy. She absorbed it. Her quarters had changed too. No longer the guest suite near the east wing, she now occupied rooms adjacent to Rourke's private floor. Bexley had overseen the relocation, adjusting security protocols without being asked. The staff treated her differently, not with careful neutrality reserved for temporary companions, but with quiet deference given to someone whose status was clearly understood. She was learning the business. Not decoratively, practically. On a cold October afternoon, Aveline sat in the compound library, reviewing shipping schedules. Bexley had asked her to cross-reference them with union shift patterns and flag irregularities. She'd filled 2 pages with notes when Keegan appeared in the doorway. He was 43, ambitious in the way that made him valuable but required watching. "The dawn keeps you close," he said, voice casual, as he browsed bookshelves. Aveline looked up. "He asks me to learn things. I learn them. Makes people curious what you offer that others didn't." She set down her pen. "I don't know what others offered. I only know what I don't offer." "And what's that?" "Lies." She returned to the schedule. "He seems to value that." Keegan's laugh was sharp. "Honesty. In this world, honesty gets you killed. Then I suppose I'm fortunate he values it differently." The underboss moved closer, stopping beside her chair. This was the test, when proximity became pressure. "You're fortunate he values you at all," Keegan said. "But value changes. Especially when—" "Enough." Rourke's voice cut from the doorway. The single word carried absolute authority. Keegan straightened. "Just conversation, Rourke. Conversation is finished. Leave." The underboss held position for 3 seconds, then walked past without another word. Rourke waited until the footsteps faded. He'd been in the adjacent office when Bexley's alert had pinged. Keegan entered library. Subject: Aveline. The notification system had been implemented 6 weeks ago. Aveline hadn't moved. Her hands remained steady, pen poised. No trembling, no tears. "He was testing you," Rourke said. "I know." She made a notation, circling it twice. "You could have called for security." "I didn't need to. I wasn't in danger." "How did you know?" "Because if he'd actually wanted to hurt me, he wouldn't have talked first. He wanted to see if I'd break." She met his gaze. "I didn't." Something shifted in Rourke's chest. She wasn't performing strength. She genuinely assessed the situation. "And what would you have done if I hadn't arrived?" "Told you afterward, honestly." She returned to the schedules. "The way I tell you everything." There it was. In Rourke's world where everyone angled, everyone performed. Her transparency was armor no one knew how to penetrate. You couldn't manipulate someone with no angles to exploit. Couldn't threaten someone who would simply report it. Keegan had tested her for weakness. He'd found only honesty so complete, it functioned as shield. Rourke moved to the window. Container ships moved through choreographed patterns below. Everything in his world operated on systems. Aveline was learning those systems. But she wasn't becoming part of them. She was becoming something else. The schedule, he said. What did you find? Thursday's loading dock crew has 2 names I don't recognize from the union roster. Matter of fact, either the roster's outdated, or someone added workers without clearance. Which do you think? Brief pause. The roster was updated last week. This discrepancy appeared this morning. Someone added them recently. Rourke turned. She'd gone back to marking schedules, pen moving with careful precision. Learning his business not because she wanted power, but because he'd asked her to. 2 months ago, she'd been delivered as temporary acquisition. Today she was identifying security vulnerabilities and handling underboss challenges with the same calm honesty that had first caught his attention. Her status had shifted. Not because he'd announced it, because she'd earned it through the one currency his world couldn't counterfeit. Good work, Rourke said quietly. Flag it for Bexley. Aveline nodded. Already did. Of course she had. Chapter 6. The library fell silent after Keegan's departure. Rourke remained by the doorway, listening to footsteps fade down the hallway. Only then did he move into the room. Aveline sat exactly as she had throughout, pen in hand, schedule before her, posture neither rigid nor falsely relaxed. Just present. Rourke had watched through security feed, Bexley's alert triggering the moment Keegan entered. The cameras captured Keegan's calculated approach, his testing proximity. What they couldn't capture was what Rourke saw in Aveline's micro-expressions, the brief assessment, the controlled breathing, the stillness. She'd known exactly what was happening. And handled it. Outside, afternoon sun glinted off shipping containers. Everything in his world operated on patterns, power dynamics, threat responses, predictable ways people broke under pressure. Aveline kept disrupting those patterns. He was testing you, Rourke said quietly. I know. Aveline made a notation, circled it twice, then looked up. You could have called security. There's a panic button under the desk. I know. Bexley showed me. She met his gaze. I didn't need it. Why not? Because I wasn't in danger. How did you know that? Aveline considered thoughtfully. If Keegan wanted to hurt me, he wouldn't have talked first. The talking was the test. He wanted to see if I'd break, panic, perform like others have before. Something tightened in Rourke's chest. She'd assessed an underboss with the same clear honesty she brought to everything. No dramatics. Just observation. What would you have done if I hadn't arrived? Told you afterward. Honestly. She picked up the pen. The way I tell you everything. The revelation recalibrated everything he understood about protection. You would have just told me. Yes. Because that's what you asked. Be honest. Don't perform. Don't hide things. She looked up, curious. Isn't that why you value me differently? The question cut to truth he hadn't articulated. In Rourke's world, everyone performed. Everyone calculated angles, leveraged information. Protection meant guards and protocols because people couldn't be trusted to report threats accurately. They'd exaggerate for attention, or minimize for pride. But Aveline would simply tell the truth. No embellishment, no performance. That transparency made her impossible to approach, as Keegan had tried. You couldn't exploit someone with no angles. Couldn't threaten someone who'd report it directly. Her honesty wasn't weakness. It was armor no one knew how to penetrate. Yes, Rourke said finally. That's exactly why. Aveline nodded, then returned to the schedule. Rourke watched her work. He'd implemented alerts, guards, protocols, external protections. But Aveline's real protection came from within. From being exactly who she was. Keegan had tested for weakness, found only truth so unadorned it had nowhere for pressure to gain purchase. The schedule, Rourke said. What did you find? Thursday's dock crew has 2 names I don't recognize. She turned the page. Marcus Chen and David Park. Either the roster needs updating, or someone added them without clearance. Which? The roster was updated last week. These names appeared this morning. Someone added them recently. Rourke studied her precise notations. 2 months ago, temporary acquisition. Today, identifying security vulnerabilities with unperformative competence. Good work. Flag it for Bexley. He paused. And Aveline, next time someone tests you, you can still call security. Even if you're not in danger. Protection isn't just about need. She considered this, nodded slowly. I'll remember. But they both knew she probably wouldn't. Because calling for help would feel like lying about danger she'd accurately assessed. And Aveline didn't lie. That was why she was untouchable. Why his protection was becoming less about guarding an asset, and more about defending something rare enough to reshape power itself. He left her working, pulling the door almost closed. Bexley waited in the hallway. The discrepancy she found, priority investigation. Already on it. Bexley's eyes tracked to the library. She handled Keegan well. She handled him honestly. Rourke started toward his office. In this world, that's better than well. Better than anyone else could have managed. Better in ways that made her simultaneously more valuable and more vulnerable than any protection system he could design. Chapter 7. 6 months changed the architecture of power itself. Bexley requested the meeting at dawn, when the compound was quietest. They stood in Rourke's office, overlooking the waterfront, where container ships moved through morning fog. "We need to discuss Aveline." Rourke didn't look up from the logistics report. "What about her? She's become a vulnerability. Rivals have noticed your restructuring. They're asking questions. Let them ask." "Rourke." The urgency was rare. "You've changed how the entire compound operates. Elevated her from companion to, I don't even know what to call it, protected asset. Protected assets don't sit in on expansion meetings. Don't review confidential schedules. Don't identify security vulnerabilities." Bexley stepped closer. "She's learning the business, because she'll need to understand it." The silence was profound. "You're talking succession. I'm talking legacy. There's a difference. Not to our rivals. They'll see her as leverage. And she doesn't know how to protect herself. She tells the truth when she should lie. She's honest." Rourke's voice cut like a blade. "She's honest in a world built on deception. And that makes her more valuable than every calculated player in this compound." Bexley exhaled slowly. "You're in love with her. I'm invested in her protection. There's a difference." "Is there?" Rourke moved to the window, overlooking the empire he'd built through careful violence and strategic restraint. "She didn't choose this world. I brought her into it. That makes her safety my responsibility, not my indulgence, my obligation. And when rivals test that obligation, then they learn the difference between possession and protection." Something in Rourke's expression made Bexley straighten. "I possessed assets before, discarded them when convenient." His voice dropped to certainty. "But Aveline isn't an asset. She's legacy. And legacy doesn't get discarded. It gets defended." Bexley saw the full implications. "You're redefining the power structure." "I'm redefining power itself. Power has always meant taking what you want, possessing it, controlling it." Rourke's gaze held Bexley's. "Real power isn't claiming everything you can take. It's choosing what to protect instead of what to possess. Rivals will see it as weakness. They'll be wrong. Something dangerous, flickered. When they test it, they'll discover that defending legacy requires different tools than acquiring assets. Harsher tools. More permanent solutions." "Does she know that you've designated her legacy?" "Not in those terms. Should she?" Outside, fog was lifting, revealing the waterfront operations. "She should know she's protected, but not why or how permanent." Rourke looked at Bexley directly. Knowing would change how she operates. She'd start performing protection instead of earning it. The moment she starts performing is the moment she becomes like everyone else. "You're protecting her honesty. It's the one currency that can't be counterfeited." Rourke returned to the report. "Update security protocols. Full surveillance on anyone who approaches her. Immediate intervention on threats. And make it clear through appropriate channels. Legacy is permanent. Not negotiable, not touchable." "Understood." Bexley paused at the door. "This changes everything, not just for her, for how the entire organization functions. Once you establish someone as legacy, rather than asset, you can't walk that back. Ever." "I know. And you're certain." Rourke held his gaze with absolute clarity. 6 months ago, I acquired what I thought was temporary. I've spent the time since discovering I was wrong about everything." He set down the report. "Yes, this is the only play that makes sense. Then we defend it." "We defend her," Rourke corrected. "She's the point." After Bexley left, Rourke returned to the window. Down in the courtyard, Aveline crossed from the library to the main building, modest posture unchanged, despite 6 months of elevation. She carried papers, probably schedules, probably already flagged with careful notations. She didn't know she'd just been designated legacy, didn't know the power structure was being recalibrated around her protection, didn't know Rourke had chosen restraint over possession because she was the one thing that couldn't be owned, only defended. She disappeared into the building. Tomorrow, new protocols. Tonight, restructuring the very definition of power. Some things were worth more protected than possessed. And Aveline, honest, transparent, incapable of performance, was all of them. Conclusion? Rourke Hanley had built an empire on taking what he wanted and discarding what he didn't need. But Aveline Cross, delivered as temporary acquisition, discovered as irreplaceable truth, taught him something his world had never valued. That real power isn't measured by what you possess, but by what you choose to protect. In 6 months, her honest transparency in a world built on deception became the one thing no one could manipulate, threaten, or replicate. She didn't perform strength. She simply existed truthfully. And that honesty, so complete it functioned as armor, redefined everything. Not just her status, but the very architecture of power itself. From companion to legacy, from possession to protection, from control to restraint, as the highest form of dominance. Some things, Rourke learned, are worth more defended than owned. Ligs blank, underscore, blank. If this story resonated with you, the tension between honesty and survival, the transformation of power through restraint, the way innocence can become strategic armor, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below, sharing what stood out most to you. Was it Aveline's unflinching transparency, Rourke's shift from possession to protection, the way truth became untouchable in a world of lies? And if you want more stories that explore complex power dynamics, psychological tension, and characters who redefine what strength actually means, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's much more to come. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.